everyone. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group Sunday night special edition. We're happy to have you this evening. A couple of new things coming out this past week. We're going to talk about a little winter weather that Evan experienced, something that's kind of rare. Have you ever heard of paper mill effect snow? Maybe you haven't. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about some of the snow events we've had over the last week. But first, hot off the presses is the 2020 billion dollar weather climate disaster map. And in 2020, 22 weather climate disaster events happened in the country. These events exceeded $1 billion in damages that affected the United States. Kind of a breakdown with this. One of the events was a drought event, 13 severe storm events, 7 tropical cyclone events, and 1 wildfire event occurred in 2020 that accrued damages over $1 billion. Overall, these events resulted in the death of 262 people and had significant economic impacts on the areas that they affected. On average, the country sees about 7 events. But over the last 5 years, those 7 events kind of doubled to, well, a little bit more than doubled, 16 events. And then in 2020, we had 22 of these events. So you'll see the map here and you can kind of see that. I am going to kind of talk a few of the events, and I've got the panel here with me, and we can kind of talk about any of these that we want to. One of the biggest events, guys, that we saw that we've talked about a few times last year was the Western wildfires that consumed more portions of California and Oregon and Washington. They called these firestorms actually in this breakdown. Estimated cost was $16.5 billion in the western part of the country with these wildfires. And, we talked with Jordan on a previous show that you'll be seeing here shortly. We didn't really have drought conditions in the Carolinas this year, but there were some parts of the country that did. And out west, these wildfires really created a lot of damage. Guys, I know we saw and shared some images, but it was pretty scary out there at times over the fall with these wildfires.
Yeah, it sure was. We even had smoke reach over here into the eastern United States and into the Carolinas and caused some visibility issues over here. So its impacts were felt far and wide. Unfortunately, 2020 was a rough year for wildfires across the globe. Many of you will remember the Australia fires, and then watching fires unfold in California, Washington, and Oregon, where the burn scars were visible from space and even still are, as well as the Colorado one, Scotty. That one stands out in my mind as one of the more unique and obviously devastating of the year, the Cameron Peak fire that it's now the largest, or was, it's over now, but is the largest wildfire in Colorado state history, and just did untold damage in that area as well. That's heartbreaking to see that, and I can't imagine the loss that the folks who are affected that must feel.
Yeah, definitely some scary stuff. Out of that, Shay, I'll bring you in with this and anybody else who wants to comment. We had 7 tropical events that created over $1 billion in damages. And of those 7, 3 of them were Greek alphabet. And that was Eta, Zeta, and Delta, along with Sally, Isaias, Laura, and Hannah. And even the Carolinas had effects with Isaias and Eta and Delta, I believe, also affected portions of the Carolinas. But we knew going into this year, Shay, that 2020 was going to be a pretty active tropical season. But to see 7 storms, and of those 7, 3 of them from the Greek alphabet that created $1 billion in damage, is kind of scary.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely right, Scotty. This is by far one of the craziest years I can ever remember in the hurricane season. We had so many storms that you saw some different things this year. You saw storms that rapidly intensified just before making landfall. And as they made their way inland, they still didn't weaken as fast as they normally would. So there's some strange anomalies going on with these things this year. It's indicative of climate pattern in general. We're seeing some different things with heating that are contributing to rapid intensification. We're still trying to figure out some of the details on that. And there's a lot of studies going on for rapid intensification because it's becoming a more well-known topic in the Atlantic, which you usually would see down in the Caribbean or even portions of the Gulf. the southern Gulf or the southern Caribbean areas. It's becoming alarming how much this is happening. I think we saw um, several storms that did that. Now, when you end up getting them pinched in between the Bermuda High, which basically is clockwise motion over the Atlantic that peels into the southeast region and basically steers storms around it along cold fronts and things that sweep these storms up out of the Gulf. And we just saw surge after surge after surge. These storms pretty much all took the same track. They go north and then they go east, because that's what the Coriolis effect does. It keeps the traffic going from west to east across the United States. And at some point in latitude, it's going to start bending and then heading towards the southeast region. And when that happens, you get a huge slug of Gulf moisture that comes up along the east side of the storm. And it just exacerbates the rain situation in places like the mountains of North Carolina, the Appalachians, and even lee side into the Piedmont areas. So we saw a lot of, there's technical terms for this. You have isentropic lift, you have all these technical terms, but the bottom line is just this amount of rainfall that was just dumped over these areas due to these systematic tropical storms, or by the time they came through, there may have been tropical storms. But these cyclones that just kept making landfall over and over and over again. Louisiana, especially along the east side of the storms, they had just some unbelievable amounts of rainfall there too. But I mean, Jordan, I know Jordan can speak to some of the precip. We just had a show with him on it, and I tell you what, man, that was something else, especially to see us get that far into the Greek alphabet. It's unheard of.
Yeah, definitely so, Shay. Of these 22 events, 13 severe weather events, January, February, March, April, and May, all 5 months had specific events. A couple that we want to talk about: February 2nd through the 5th, we had tornadoes that moved through the area. In fact, parts of uptown Charlotte affected by the tornadoes, and we've got some video that we can roll of that. But we also had events the next month, one that I specifically want to talk about. It happened March the 3rd and 4th, and this was right before COVID kind of just took over the news cycle. There was an EF4 tornado and an EF3 tornado that caused considerable damage across the Nashville Metroplex. And the EF4 tornado actually went through downtown Nashville. These tornadoes cost $2.5 billion of damage and 25 deaths. I will never forget. It's an event that kind of fascinated me because it was well captured on all these videos. If you go to YouTube or Twitter and you just type in Nashville 2020 tornado, you can see all of these different videos and perspectives of that tornado moving through downtown Nashville, and just scary sight for that area. We also saw severe weather events in April, the Easter outbreak, where we saw an EF4 tornado in the southern part of South Carolina. Guys, that was an event I don't think we'll ever forget. 61 tornadoes total for the year in South Carolina, but this April event really produced several tornadoes, damaging tornadoes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a late night for many of us here at the Carolina Weather Group, as we stayed up into the early morning and even the morning hours, going into the 4th, 5th, I don't remember the exact date there, but the day that the EF4 did so much damage in South Carolina. Scotty, as you just mentioned, it was a horrific event, and unfortunately one of several that impacted the Carolinas throughout the year.
It was. And one other event that I want to specifically for us to talk about occurred on August the 10th, 2020. And this was the powerful derecho that swept through Iowa, causing $11 billion in damage, for casualties from this event. But the derecho, powerful derecho traveled from southeast South Dakota to Ohio, a path of 770 miles in a 14-hour period, creating widespread wind gusts greater than 100 miles per hour. The states most affected was Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, Indiana, and Ohio. This caused millions of acres of corn and soybean crops to be destroyed across central Iowa. I remember just seeing some of the pictures coming out of that. This is all, I mean, derechos are a very powerful thing, but this is almost like an inland hurricane just sweeping through the heart of Iowa and destroying all these crops.
I know a good portion of the areas affected by that are still unfortunately looking um, quite rough. The damage path has yet to be fully replenished and rebuilt. Many of the folks out there are still struggling. So if you're willing to help out, there are many ways to do such. But I saw a very interesting statistic the other day that applies to this, Scotty. That is that 8% of all of the lightning strikes in 2020 in Iowa occurred in the very short window of time that derecho moved across the state. Now, 8% may not sound like a big number, but if you look at how the lightning strikes normally placed out throughout the year, to have 8% in a 6-hour period is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, that was just a crazy, crazy system. So, those were some of the major catastrophes that occurred on this as we finish up 2020. Again, you can find this information out. NOAA releases this every year. It's the $1 billion weather and climate disasters. And these are some interesting things to kind of look back on and see where some of the hardest hit areas of the country from the previous year with these catastrophes that cause billions and billions of dollars of damage. So, with that, we had some weather to talk about. Evan, I know on Wednesday, January 13th, we saw, I guess, a surprise snow when the skies were clear in a big portion of the North Carolina mountains. A localized area saw a little bit of snow just outside of the Asheville area.
Yeah, so we had two distinct, very bizarre weather phenomenons occur this morning in the Asheville area. The first, and the one that Scotty has just mentioned, was paper mill effect snowfall just to the west of downtown Asheville. If you're familiar with the Asheville area, you'll likely know Canton, North Carolina. It's home to a big paper mill. It smells really bad, but it's a beautiful city. Well, this morning, because of some wild temperature profiles in the lower atmosphere, the particulates being lifted out of the paper mill and the extra little boost in the lower level moisture content and upward vertical velocity were just enough to create a bit of snowfall downstream of that paper mill. Not only did people see flakes, but there was accumulation. I saw several photos where half an inch to an inch of snowfall accumulated near the plant, which is incredible. That has never happened that I'm aware of in Canton before. That has only ever happened similar to that once in the Asheville area a few years ago back on Lake Julian near one of the power plants down there. So that was event number one, happened early this morning. At the same time, 10 to 15 miles to the east in downtown Asheville and areas just to the east of downtown, we had a bizarre phenomenon occur that I will struggle to explain. So here's my best shot. We had what we believe to be diamond dust this morning. Now, if you know anything about diamond dust, you'll know that it usually occurs in temperatures below -10, -20 degrees Celsius, oftentimes even colder than that. It is a very fine crystal that forms out of clear skies. So it'll be blue sky up above, and you'll have these tiny little fine crystals forming, and they glint in the sunshine and just kind of generally float around and slowly drift towards the ground. Typically, that happens in Antarctica or northern Canada. Very, very, very rarely do you see it in an area like the Appalachian Mountains, especially when temperatures are only in the mid 20s Fahrenheit above zero. That's practically unheard of. So it was a special event for the folks who got to see it. It was beautiful to see the little glimmering crystals in the air. And I'm sure there would be plenty of debate if this were recognized by some larger meteorologists about whether or not it was actually diamond dust, but I don't see how it couldn't have been. I mean, every clear blue skies, crystals, a temperature inversion, and a very moist, low-level atmosphere. It was fascinating.
That's a really interesting topic, Evan. We've seen that over the Great Lakes in some areas where airplanes flying through a layer of the atmosphere can actually trigger snow. It just upsets the upper mid-level clouding. There may be a thin layer, maybe some cirrus clouding. You have ice crystals up there, and once you break that barrier, it's almost like the sky punch or the hole punch cloud effect, right? Where it sublimates, but actually creates snow and makes it to the ground. So we've seen that happen before in the Great Lakes. And I'm wondering if maybe something like that had happened up in that direction. It's fascinating for sure, but we've seen where factories and airplanes can trigger these events from time to time. So pretty interesting for that area. Don't really see a lot of that kind of activity.
Absolutely. It'll be a day that a lot of folks remember. I know there were a lot of even non-weather lovers in the Asheville area that were very confused about this fine little particulate in the air this morning. So I'm glad that we were able to shed a little bit of light on it. But meteorologists are still confused as well because it doesn't happen here all that often. So yeah, that's generally what we saw this morning, Wednesday morning, January 13th.
All right, guys, and I've been ribbed a lot on Twitter the last week about snow gloating, so I've got to call out my friends at WFMY, Christian Morgan and Tim Buckley, and our good friend Wes Grimes. Yes, I did get snow, and I am going to gloat about it anytime that I get snow. We got some snow on Monday, January the 11th. A little system that was supposed to not bring any moisture up our way. At least we wasn't really forecasting any snow, and we had some big snowflakes falling for a good chunk of our Monday, where we didn't really pick up any accumulation, but we had some big snowflakes falling from the sky, and I wanted to share it with my weather friends, and our friends up in the Piedmont Triad area wasn't too happy about it because they weren't getting any snowflakes. So Tim, Christian, Wes, that snows for you. There's been numerous times, especially last year, where you got accumulating snowfall and we didn't get anything here in the foothills. So I just think it's a little payback if you want to know the truth.
I think
so,
Tim summed it up in one word. He called it pain.
That's right. That's right. Well, guys,
it is payback.
It is,
Scotty. It is payback. It's a payback from me cursing you from the last storm and not getting all that much.
I was gonna say, the week before that we was looking at a potentially big snow and didn't really materialize for a big portion of the area. I guess we could talk a little bit about that before we end the show. Every model, and I'd love for you guys to chime in. Shay, I know you don't necessarily live in the Western Carolinas, but I know you pay attention to the weather up here. Every model showed a lot of moisture and marginally cool air. So we're like, hey, we could see snow, but it may not stick because the temperatures aren't really there. We didn't really get the moisture that the models were depicting. And a lot of folks on that Friday and Saturday were a little upset with us. And hey, when we miss it, we miss it. We try to tell you why. And, we knew the temperatures was going to be kind of a factor, but we really wasn't anticipating less moisture than what the models were picking up. Evan, care to chime in?
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, Scotty. We had multiple issues, and unfortunately, it was like the domino effect. One led to the other. We had a lot of downsloping as precipitation moved into Western North Carolina, and that really messed up our temperatures. Instead of getting down to 30, 31 degrees, we only got down to 32 to 35 degrees. And I mean, seriously, it all connects. Our temperatures weren't low enough. We didn't have enough precipitation. If we had enough precipitation, even at 32 or 33 degrees, we could have laid down a layer of snow. Heavy precipitation rates, even with warm ground, it'll overcome it. It will stick. But for many locations, really, unfortunately, in the lowest 300 feet of the atmosphere in Western North Carolina, they didn't get a whole lot of snow. Maybe woke up with an inch of snow on the ground, and by Friday afternoon had nothing. All of this following a forecast of 5 to 8 inches of snowfall from every outlet that you can think of. It was unfortunate.
Weather knows how to humble you. I'm telling you, I felt this big Friday afternoon. I was like, man, it was tough. But
yeah, Scotty, I saw what
you
said. You said you were kind of apologizing for it, but one thing that these models that a lot of energy goes into looking at deterministic models. And I don't even think many of the dynamic models. There was the 32 panel from the Euro that showed some different things going on with the low, but you had kind of a surface low trudging across with troughing. And so that was bringing up sort of an easterly surface flow, which you had a little bit of warm nosing going in up front to start. Once you get that wraparound flow and you get that northerly flow, then things start to kind of culminate with the snow effect and your dendritic growth zone. But you had an upper low to the west, and you had another upper low to that west, and those two, all three of these factors, really it introduced a layer of dry slotting in between And that just killed a lot of the snowfall totals for a lot of folks, even if the temperatures were there. Some of that snow made it all the way down to Aiken and Augusta. There was some flurries from Augusta to Columbia, which was not forecast to happen, but you had that wraparound flow, the upper low. And so some of these dynamical features happen that these deterministic models just don't catch. And it just makes it really difficult to pin down the forecast. So, it's tough to tell that to the audience. They don't understand. Yeah, hey, there's a real science behind it, but I didn't see where those dynamical models caught that either. And when you're really working off of gut instinct and the modeling, you wouldn't have seen that dry slot coming. I think there was some talk about it was brought up, but it just looked like it was going to be a better event than what it really came down to in the end.
Yeah, it wasn't your typical setup for winter weather. It was one that we knew we had to get everything right. And I know a lot of folks hear us say this, but it's really true. A degree or two means all the difference. And when we look at QPF, which is quantitative precipitation forecast, it was all showing anywhere between a half an inch to an inch. And normally it's a 10-to-1 ratio. So you'd be looking at 5 to 10 inches of snow, and every model had that. We were kind of a little bit talking about what, like Evan said, the temperatures are marginal. So we may not eclipse that 10 inches, but it's still possible that we could get the lower ends of those, and it didn't pan out. So it happens sometimes.
To make matters worse on that, Scotty, just to really drive this home, the Asheville Airport had all snow through the entire event and measured on a snowboard. Their final snow ratio with snow to QPF was a little less than 6-to-1, which is just sopping wet, practically liquid snow.
Yeah, you could, I mean, I did it. You could get the snow in your hand and squeeze it, and you just see the water ring out of it. So,
winter's not over yet. Winter's not over yet. There's still time for more events to happen. So if you like snow, just keep your cap on. It's probably going to come if you live in North Carolina at some point. We're a little harder down here in Charleston along the coast. It takes a lot more here for that to happen, but definitely Western North Carolina, upstate South Carolina, not over yet.
I was going to toss to you before we end, because I know you really love the teleconnections and the La Nina and El Nino side. This is not our typical La Nina setup. What do you see over the next couple of weeks? Some rumors out there of some polar vortex split or some SSW. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I think we have a stratospheric polar vortex advancement into the northern tier and down, even down to the plains. And so I think what we may see as a result of that is a Rossby wave effect going on the last week of January. So there's some timing involved with that. There may be a couple of waves of cool air cooling down to the southeast region. The latter half of January per NOAA climate reports that they have a cooler than average and above average precip sort of signal going on. So it's definitely something to watch. I think there's going to be some potential for wintry weather to make it into the southeast. Just how far deep it penetrates has yet to be determined, but I think deep south may see a swing at it again, maybe once or twice. And then we got to really watch Western North Carolina, upstate South Carolina, and see what happens there. And some of the longer range models are showing something else at the very end of January. But that's too far out to really make any calls on it yet. It's just something we're watching for consistency in the modeling. But typically for the eastern half of South Carolina, it's usually late December, early January when we would see any kind of real activity. But hey, we've seen snow here in the first week of March, so anything's possible. I just say anything's possible between January and March. Really, I mean, you just got to be patient if it's something you're waiting for. We don't wish cast anything here, so if it's going to happen, you'll know it from us.
It's all about pattern recognition. And like Shay said, the pattern looks a little bit more favorable as we get towards the end of January. So, gentlemen, anything else to talk about before we wrap up this Sunday special? Make sure that you check out our Patreon page. We'd love for you to subscribe to that. There's different tiers, and those different tiers give you additional options. And we look to expand our Patreon page this year and give you a little bit more access to some things that we do. So we'd love for you to check that out as well. So for everyone here at the Carolina Weather Group, we hope you had a great weekend. We hope you enjoyed this Sunday special, and we'll see you again Wednesday night for part 2 with Jim Cantori.